Hello everyone, we're here with Madison Wong, who is a Vice President of Products in CloudOps. Welcome, Madison, to our virtual conference.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
The scene is completely yours. At the end, we will have also Q&A, so everybody who is in this session, just leave your questions in the Q&A tab, and I'm pretty sure Madison will be more than happy to answer them at the end.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Yvette. So hi, everyone. Welcome to my talk. By way of introduction, my name is Madison Long, and for the past 3 years, I've had the pleasure of working with a variety of different service providers around the world and helping them assemble, launch, sustain, and evolve their edge-to-cloud businesses. At CloudOps, we're on a mission to help companies own their destiny in the cloud. And during the early days of cloud building, our mission led us to engage in one of the most promising open source infrastructure platforms and communities, CloudStack. And to this day, we continue to be a proud supporter of the ecosystem and have been involved in many different initiatives in the CloudStack community, including helping develop integrations with different storage vendors like NetApp and Datera, helping develop an integration between CloudStack and bare metal orchestration platforms like Canonical's Metal as a Service. And as my colleagues, Will Stevens and Patrick Dubé did in a workshop yesterday, they showed the integration between CloudStack and Kubernetes. And I guess that's all to say that we're really committed to actively supporting this community and evolving the needs of the community to meet the needs of the different operators and end users of the platform. But something we noticed in attending a lot of these different conferences, not really CloudStack specifically, but also the OpenStack conferences and different cloud conferences, was there was rarely a focus on and a discussion around how a service provider would actually go about building on the foundations of CloudStack to productize and commercialize their own differentiated delivering cloud business. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. So delivering cloud can be very challenging. How does a service provider leverage the flexibility, control, and automation of an open source infrastructure platform alongside a complementary portfolio of different cloud services like object storage and block storage and bare metal and the hyperscale cloud providers and Kubernetes and these different technologies that are very complementary and help serve the needs of their business customers, but how do they actually pull all this together, deliver, operate, and charge back for this with their business customers? How do they apply their own sort of pricing models to meter and charge back for the usage and calculate taxes within the different regions and bill and invoice their customers? And how do they deliver this open source and multi-vendor cloud portfolio under their own brand with a consistent normalized user experience and APIs? So it's no different to spin up a virtual machine on CloudStack as it should be to do so on a public cloud platform or one of the other platforms that these service providers are offering to their end customers. And these are really the questions and the problem set that we've been actively addressing with many different service provider partners and hundreds of their enterprise end users who use CloudStack as a foundation to offer a portfolio of cloud services through our software, CloudMC. So I just wanted to start off by actually talking about what a cloud services portfolio can look like. So many different service providers that we work with end up leasing, owning, or operating their own regional data centers. And a lot of them have multi-tenant infrastructure offerings. And we've seen that these different infrastructure offerings are often built using open source technologies, such as OpenStack and CloudStack, and more recently with the growth of cloud native technologies, Kubernetes as well. And these portfolio of data centers and central offices and cell towers and the thing that the telcos call the beachfront properties can be really operationalized and commoditized for different really interesting use cases. And I'm going to talk about some of those use cases later, but they can be things like supporting low latency applications, providing data sovereign regional storage for connected devices, to running graphically intensive digital workspaces for power users that are part of a geographically disparate workforce. And a good portion of the enterprise customers that we work with also have their own private on-premises infrastructure. And for heavily regulated industries like healthcare, this is going to be where they run most, if not all, their applications today. And of course, we also know that enterprise customers do run applications on the 3 major hyperscale cloud providers. But when I look at this from an end user perspective, this is really going to be an operational challenge. What does an end user do with their legacy workloads that are going to be on their premise? Do they lift and shift to the public cloud, or is this going to present new challenges for them? What if their on-premise systems have to communicate with a system running in one of the hyperscale cloud providers? What if they have to communicate with a mission critical application that, for reasons of, say, data privacy or compliance or sovereignty or sometimes cost, runs on one of those regionally diverse data center clouds? And most importantly, how does an end user really bring this all together in a way that actually helps them focus on their differentiated value and evolve their applications and business? I guess all this to say, multi-cloud is not really a strategy. It's a reality for most enterprises. SaaS and on-premise applications, whether they're bought or built, are not uniformly deployed on a single infrastructure provider. And one of the hardest challenges that we see, and will continue to be one of the hardest challenges, is actually the networking between the customer's premise, the regional, the edge, and the hyperscale cloud infrastructure. And so, of course, reliable and secure connectivity between these different cloud environments is a really important part of the value chain. And for some of the telecoms that we've engaged with, there's a certain familiarity and comfort to offering connectivity services. And a lot of them do see that's the majority of the value they provide within this cloud computing value chain today. But when we engage with them, it becomes clear that connectivity alone is insufficient to actually grow their enterprise business. We know that they can produce high value growth opportunities when they leverage the full capabilities of their assets, when they invest in their people, and when they broaden their portfolio to include this kind of, say, edge to cloud services spectrum alongside their connectivity offerings. With the right training and enablement, we've seen many service providers go along the journey of evolving from selling bespoke products to selling solutions that are tied to their customers' business outcomes that actually include a collection of different products. And we believe that these different edge to cloud customers are going to produce a lot of data. And we've seen this from our service providers and users to date. They want to improve their user experience through lower latency. A lot of them are trying to optimize costs. And these can really be both larger enterprises and even smaller, fast-growing SaaS companies that are developing brand new applications with cloud-native infrastructures. So how do service providers solve for the needs of this innovation ecosystem of edge-to-cloud adopters? So first, service providers do need to invest in their people, their process, and technology changes that are required to evolve their business and become a key player within this value chain. They need to understand the regional market, what's being served well by the hyperscale cloud providers and where are there gaps in their market. And wherever possible, building on the existing infrastructure and network assets they may have in place should be the go-to. And I guess the last thing I'd say is it's really important for them to really bring this together in a consistent, normalized experience through API-driven orchestration, delivering their whole platform as a service and actually taking responsibility and ownership of their customers' experience. There's really a lot you can do as a service provider when you reorient your business around becoming a platform-oriented cloud business. You can provide end-to-end visibility and control of these edge-to-cloud environments. You can serve up, backup and disaster recovery to ensure business continuity in the scenario that there's security breaches or infrastructure failures. Of course, there's connectivity services for the telcos to enable businesses to have their clouds connected and be able to transfer data and access applications in a secure and reliable way. And there's also value-added cloud services you can serve on top, such as digital workspaces to enable businesses to support their distributed workforce. A lot of times when I show this type of diagram, I end up giving an analogy, and that is prior to the pandemic, the best restaurants that I had been to were the ones that were successfully able to combine a mixture of hyper-local, regional, and global menu ingredients into the items they serve. So if you think about a restaurant, hyper-local could be herbs grown in the backyard of the restaurant, regional could be fish from a local ocean, and global could be coffee or tea when you're done the meal, which is relatively globally available and relatively undifferentiated. And we really saw service providers in a similar light. We thought that they could get the best mix of leveraging hyper-local infrastructure either on the enterprise customer's premise or near the enterprise customer's premise through the different edge data centers. We thought they could serve up really interesting regional offerings to give data sovereignty and better latency and just filling gaps within the market. And then, of course, also exposing the innovation of these global hyperscale cloud providers, but doing so in a way where they're actually tailoring the set of services that are offering to fill the kind of unaddressed and underaddressed gaps within the market. But one of the important things to think about when you're looking at a portfolio of cloud services that you can offer in different regions is that each and individual regional markets are evolving at different rates within different verticals. And so it's important to consider the dynamic of your regional end market because there can be quite a lot of differences between them. So if I start up here up north, we're proudly based in Canada. I'm actually based in Ottawa right now. And we continue to see the growing adoption of these hyperscale cloud providers to the point that actually when the pandemic began, there was such heavy increased consumption of one of the specific popular cloud regions that it actually ran out of capacity. So it was ironically not very hyperscale in that way, but it was an indirect result of that event. But Canadians are still, and their businesses are still not adequately served when it comes to latency to and availability and affordability of specific cloud services. We also often experience the negative consequences of currency fluctuation because when we consume hyperscale cloud provider services, they're pricing them in the US dollar, and then the conversion back to the Canadian dollar is not always advantageous to us. There's also considerations around highly regulated industries and the need to have data sovereignty and be subject to as few jurisdictions as possible. And there's also kind of a very unique regional element, which is that for both the Quebec market as well as the Canadian government, they require 24/7 bilingual English and French support, which is not always offered or offered to the extent they need from different cloud suppliers in other markets. And so when you look at these kind of regional implications, it becomes clear that there is an interesting opportunity for a tailored portfolio of Canadian cloud services that is complementary to the hyperscale cloud providers, but provides differentiated value through lower latency and solving for the regional needs of Canadian businesses. And this is where I'm going to give you a plug. So if you want to learn more about the story of one of our key Canadian cloud partners, cloud.ca, they're actually giving a talk at this CloudStack collaboration conference tomorrow called Lessons Learned Operating a Cloud for 7 Years. So please do tune in to our customer and strategic partners talk tomorrow. When we look at our neighbors to the south, they have even greater adoption of hyperscale cloud providers, and in many ways probably have the most mature cloud computing market in the world. But even them, we've observed when we've engaged with different American businesses that they have similar types of issues around getting the proper latency to and availability and affordability of the certain specific cloud services that they needed. And with respect to the whole edge computing opportunity, I think there are, I think the American businesses will be well served by those that are early and effective to the market. And we've seen that different interesting providers, not just Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, but also different service providers like Cox Communications have launched their own portfolio of edge computing services into the market. And I think that's going to create a really interesting dynamic to see how it plays out and to see the lessons learned that we can take from this type of market. And lastly, we've also seen that within the healthcare vertical specifically, there are state-specific data laws. There's no one national data law in the United States. And so there are some restrictions that force companies to store their data within specific states in the US versus having the flexibility to run them wherever within the country. And then if we continue southeast, we see a completely different market dynamic. This is where there's relatively limited adoption of hyperscale cloud providers today, but of course, the cloud computing market is maturing very fast. These markets often do not have a great variety of cloud services available. And for service providers, I would say this represents probably the biggest opportunity, but also the biggest risk, given their incumbent position within a lot of these markets and the potential to have some very serious competition in the near future. And similar to Canadians, they also have the same sort of challenges around currency fluctuation from hyperscale cloud services. And we've seen that in Brazil and many other Latin American jurisdictions, they've introduced data privacy regulations that are now requiring and creating a greater demand for local cloud infrastructure, which we think supports the premise of different service providers launching their own portfolio of cloud computing services within their different regional markets. But what is common across all these markets is that there's significant demand for edge to cloud services, but there is no definitive regional cloud or edge market leader. Edge is really an opportunity for service providers to leverage their capabilities and their distributed data centers to deliver differentiated services within this value chain. Data sovereignty across all these jurisdictions has a big importance, especially for heavily regulated institutions that are running mission critical applications. And when you think about the hyperscale cloud providers, a lot of service providers ask me, like, are we competing against Amazon, Microsoft, and Google? And often I say, well, that's not really what I would recommend. A lot of times we recommend kind of a collaborative enablement approach where you're offering their customers, the global choice of the different services they offer, but also regional differentiation, kind of what I talked about before in terms of the perfect mix of the hyperlocal, regional, and global services that can be offered to these customers to fill the unaddressed and underaddressed gaps in the market. And last but certainly not least, I just want to place a huge importance on what the end user experience is like. To have a successful cloud business, we know that our service providers need to have platforms that deliver multiple vendor services as well as open source technologies in a consistent, normalized, and user-friendly way. And this has traditionally been a really big challenge, specifically in the telecom vertical, where telecoms and their traditional vendors weren't really known for creating very attractive and engaging user-friendly interfaces. And so we see this as an opportunity to help them overcome the disjointed user experiences that they've offered in the past and really offer a next generation experience to offering a portfolio of cloud computing services. So with the understanding that each of these markets kind of requires a different tailored approach, we wanted to touch on 3 of the most common barriers we've seen to helping cloud businesses scale up. And so the first barrier we've seen is perception. Many service providers that we've engaged with have a collection of different assumptions about what their target customers want. And they've actually factored this into a lot of their go-to-market plans, but they haven't yet done the work to actually go validate that that's actually also their customer's perception, not just a perceived perception of that customer. And what we quickly realize when we actually go with them to engage their end customers, which sometimes we do in a partnership model, we realize that this customer persona a lot of times has a perception that doesn't really line up to what the service provider actually believes. And so this is a 2021 study conducted by Analysis Mason. They're a UK-based analyst firm that focuses on the service provider segment. And I thought they just really nicely captured the differences in perception between what they refer to as a communication service provider, but I'm just going to call it a service provider, and the actual enterprise perspective on those service providers. And so, for example, right here, we've heard from a lot of service providers that enterprises prefer to use many different suppliers. But in practice, when we engage with those enterprise customers directly or through our service provider partners, what ends up being the case is that they actually want less suppliers. And for the suppliers they have, they want those suppliers to collaborate and have an integrated experience. They don't want a disjointed experience across multiple different suppliers, and they don't want innumerable numbers of suppliers. But this is often an assumption that is not challenged by the service providers when they're building these different cloud computing offerings they want to take to the market. And another great example is around the breadth of different services that a service provider can offer those enterprise customers. A lot of the service providers we talk to propose being essentially undifferentiated resellers of vendor products. So they say, hey, I want to offer my customers cloud, so I'm going to resell them VMware, or I'm going to resell them AWS. And what they fail to kind of recognize is that enterprise don't really derive any differentiated value from being resold commonly available vendor products. Where the real value lies is in having an integrated portfolio of cloud services that really help enterprises focus on the undifferentiated or focus on their differentiated value and less on the undifferentiated heavy lifting of managing their different infrastructure and assets. And better yet, as the survey says, 70% of enterprises that do not already buy cloud and different cloud related like cloud security and IoT services from their service providers would actually consider doing so if it helped them meet the business objectives they had. The second barrier that we've seen to scaling up among the service provider community is around cloud billing. It seems very straightforward to say that businesses want an easy to understand cloud bill with transparently applied costs, where it's easy to show back and charge back their internal departments or teams or projects that are associated with the cloud cost. But if you've ever read a large enterprise's hyperscale cloud bill, you'll know that sometimes you need like a PhD to understand and actually associate each and every cost within that bill to the services used and the people and the teams using those services. These bills can be really complex and obscure and kind of led to the notion of cloud sticker shock, which we now talk about today. And when we think about how much these hyperscale cloud providers have struggled to address the problem set of having clear, transparent cloud bills, we don't have much confidence that when we engage with service providers and they end up showing us their many decades old antiquated billing systems, that we have confidence that they're going to be able to use this to really support their cloud business into the future. And I can just give you one example. We had a service provider in the US that we were working with who could only, under their existing billing system, configure a pricing model for cloud once a quarter. So there was no way they could iterate and evolve with the market needs. And so cloud billing is definitely one of those areas which we put a lot of focus for our software business, for enabling our service providers. And we've seen it as one of the areas that's often not thought of as quite a barrier, but ends up being a big barrier in practice just because of the legacy billing systems that are in place that aren't really suited for the future as a service economy. And finally, selling cloud is one of the most largest challenges we've seen for our service provider community. And I really want to address 2 points on this slide. So this morning, I ended up Google searching the 3 largest Canadian telecoms not to poke fun at them too much. But I looked up their cloud offerings, and each and every one of them has a call me for cloud call to action. Can you imagine a developer picking up the phone to request cloud, and apparently within 2 business days, they're going to receive a call back to be able to talk about cloud? It's just not the way it's supposed to be. And so cloud is meant to be consumed as a service. It's what businesses expect given their experiences with AWS, with Azure, with GCP. And if you're going to be launching your own cloud services based on CloudStack, you definitely want to make sure that your end customers have an as a service experience and not a call me for cloud call to action. And so we've worked with a lot of our service providers to really get to that desired state of ditching the call me for cloud call to action and making the shift to the as a service economy. Cloud platforms should provide capabilities for the service providers to have their business customers seamlessly on board, from their website to their platform, to start up a trial, to have what they need to assess the business value and be able to convert to a billable customer without ever picking up the phone. So that's really the first point I wanted to see, because it still drives me crazy when I go on these service providers' websites and look up cloud and I get a call me for cloud call to action. And then the second thing, and this is probably even more significant under the area of selling cloud, is that it's not the same for telcos as selling connectivity. It really is a different sales process and sales involvement. And so you really do need to invest in upskilling and preparing your sales engineering and account management workforce to be able to address the cloud market opportunity. And training your commercial teams is absolutely essential, because it doesn't really matter how robust your cloud portfolio is or how well your technical team can operate clouds if your commercial team is unable to sell cloud solutions. And due to the market conditions such as availability and cost of talent today, this can easily be one of the largest barriers we've seen to our service providers scaling up. So it's definitely something to think about as you're launching or trying to scale your cloud business as a service provider. Now that we've talked about the barriers to scaling up, I'm going to provide just 3 real-world examples of what I think are quite interesting end-user case studies that one of our regional service provider partners had offered to their business customers and have addressed within the last year, and just explain how the business customer really derived differentiated value and it supported their business objectives from these different cloud solutions. And so first, there's an international gaming company that one of our service providers worked with that has a distributed workforce around the world, but it also included gaming studios in Montreal. And really, they had came to us with a mission critical problem starting in the pandemic, which really revolved around latency. They had a requirement, obviously, to work from home, as many workforces did and still do to date. And they were really challenged in trying to adapt to not having the access to the infrastructure and desktops that they had at their facilities. So in the interim, they set up a virtual desktop service that was actually hosted with the control plane by the vendor within one of the hyperscale cloud providers. But their team of teams, and specifically their game testers, required a much better latency and performance than they were getting. There was some significant degradation of experience, which made it hard for them to be able to perform what they need to do for their job. And so when they engaged with us, we looked at a hyperscale cloud provider that they were already leveraging for different cloud services. You know, was there a more performant option? Could we add GPUs, for example? And while we found the service we wanted available, it was only available in the US. So it didn't solve the latency problem. It wasn't yet available at all in Canada. And so instead, what we decided to do was actually adapt their virtual desktop control plane to run on our service provider partner's Canadian cloud infrastructure that was located in Montreal. And they also had some GPUs available to be able to support those virtual desktops. And all in all, we managed to get them down to a latency of 15 to 30 milliseconds, which was substantially better than what they were getting before, and really allowed their developers and game testers to get back to doing what they do best, ensuring gamers like myself enjoy a bug-free gaming experience. The second use case is that we actually engaged with an American climate change research institution that was looking to process really large sets of climate simulation and satellite image data. And they were using a mixture of on-premise and hyperscale cloud infrastructure, but they came to us wanting to optimize their cloud computing costs and standardize how and where they were processing and storing their data. And so we helped them do like a cost and technical analysis of various options. And for a variety of reasons, they decided to have their data analysis and processing done within the hyperscale cloud provider. But they wanted a secure and private connection to the Canadian cloud infrastructure that our service provider partner was offering, where they would be able to actually store their data as a more cost-effective option. And so all in all, implementing this solution, which included both hyperscale cloud provider, that regional Canadian cloud infrastructure, and the Cloud Connect that securely and privately connected them, allowed this research institution to be able to more efficiently standardize their data processing pipeline and optimize their costs by having the storage in the Canadian cloud, but using the elastic compute from the hyperscale cloud. And so it was a really interesting model of kind of balancing and filling the unaddressed or under-addressed gaps in the market with a regional Canadian cloud, which had both the cloud and the connectivity piece. And the final use case I wanted to talk about is a Canadian healthcare institution that had approached us wanting to securely and ethically process an array of clinical, administrative, research, and genotyping data. And they had exclusively been using on-premise infrastructure, but they weren't cloud operators and didn't really know how to create a really compelling infrastructure as a service experience for the different employees within their organization. And the requirement was they really needed elastic compute and storage, but they needed it with a guaranteed jurisdictional compliance, that it could only be subject to Canadian jurisdiction. So it couldn't be a hyperscale cloud provider or even one of those hyperscale cloud provider solutions that could be deployed on premise, because the corporation itself would still be subject to another country's jurisdiction. And so with our service provider partner, we actually helped them build a fully dedicated infrastructure stack that was deployed on the premise of the healthcare institution with remote monitoring, logging, and support. And that infrastructure stack did use CloudStack. And this enabled the researchers and the employees at this organization to be able to more efficiently leverage secure and elastic regional cloud infrastructure as a service. And so it was an interesting way to help solve their needs in a way that the hyperscale cloud providers couldn't, meeting their jurisdictional compliance and leveraging open source technologies such as CloudStack to help enable that business outcome. And so to really wrap this all up together, we're on a mission to help companies own their destiny in the cloud. And from our experience, we've seen just how challenging it can be for service providers to assemble, deliver, operate, and make money off cloud services. And we suspect that an integrated portfolio of hyperlocal, regional, and global cloud services is what's going to offer the best of breed mix that businesses are going to need in most scenarios. But each regional market we've engaged in with our service provider partners has been completely unique and required a tailored approach to offer different services to fill the unaddressed or underaddressed gaps in those regional markets. But in each of those markets, we've seen that the service provider's perception, the service provider's cloud billing, and the service provider's ability to actually sell cloud were the top 3 barriers to being able to actually scale up their cloud business. And finally, it's really important, and I said this earlier, and I'm going to say it again, to focus on end user experience and ensuring that the edge to cloud solutions that are being delivered are supporting the business objectives of the customer. As we like to say, we like to help them get there faster. And so with that, I want to thank you for attending my talk, and a special thank you to Yvette and the Shape Blue team for their hard work in organizing this conference. I really look forward to engaging with all of you this week and exploring how we can best collaborate. And if there's any questions, I'm very much happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Madison. Thanks. It was very insightful. So one question at the beginning from me. The cloud market has changed a lot, and many cloud providers and service providers are actually claiming that they're competing with hyperscalers. But I see that you have a different strategy. So what would you advise these companies which are competing with hyperscalers?
Yeah, so the competition with hyperscalers can be really challenging. And I think it really does depend on the regional market. Because if you're in Europe, you're not going to be able to contrast, say, latency to a hyperscale cloud provider because they're going to have low latency from being in that market. But if you're in Canada, US, Brazil, one of these geographically large markets, it's going to be easier to serve up different latency advantages and things like that. But I also think there's a way to actually just engage with the customers and fit their needs, because hyperscale cloud providers are not always the right choice from a cost perspective. They're not always the right choice from an availability of services that the customer needs perspective. And they're not always the right option from a jurisdictional compliance perspective, because at the end of the day, each one of these cloud providers is based in America and they're subject to American jurisdiction. Even if they're deploying their infrastructure in Europe or another area, you're still going to be subject to multiple jurisdictions. And if you're in a highly regulated industry, that is definitely not advantageous to be subject to multiple jurisdictions.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And also one of the biggest advantages, according to me, is that with service providers, you have much more flexibility to build a custom solution and get some tailored approach or consultancy, which you can't usually get with hyperscalers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say that's exactly the point, and it creates an intimacy and stickiness with the customer as well. So I think that's a perfect point you made.
Yeah, just getting the phone and call your service provider that you have a problem and they resolve it immediately.
Exactly.
Few more questions from our audience. Along with offering a combination of global plus regional plus local, is there a common interface tools to access all of these providers, then individual tools for each provider?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, I'm going to take this opportunity to plug my own product into the mix. So of course, we have our own software that helps service providers assemble their portfolio of cloud services. And it works with different open source technologies like CloudStack and multi-vendor technologies. And yesterday, my colleagues, Will Stevens and Patrick Dubé, did a great workshop that can be watched once the recording's available, actually demoing that software. So I think that's definitely a place to start, but there's also a ton of different tools you're gonna have to use alongside that, right? If you wanna offer bare metal, you're gonna have to use a bare metal orchestrator and have that be integrated with your cloud computing stack. And that's why as an ecosystem contributor, we've invested in integrations with Canonical's Metal as a Service working with CloudStack, and investing in integrations with Kubernetes working with CloudStack to make sure that the underlying pieces actually perform nicely together for the end customers. So I definitely think there's ways to do that. And I definitely think using CloudStack as a foundation is a great strategy to help you get there faster.
And do you think that SMBs can also benefit, excuse me, from offering services over cloud? If so, do you know of any examples which you can share?
Yeah, so small and medium businesses can benefit from consuming cloud services. We have seen some very nice small boutique businesses. I guess one easy example would be cloud.ca, right? They're a small boutique Canadian cloud provider that was serving the needs of highly regulated industries, as well as SaaS companies who just wanted to be subject to the Canadian jurisdiction, but not other jurisdictions as well. And so definitely there is, and I would highly recommend that everybody attend cloud.ca's talk tomorrow, which is on their experience operating that cloud for 7 years. And they'll be the right ones to talk to about that, because they've served the needs of smaller businesses and they themselves are also a smaller boutique cloud provider.
Yeah, thank you, Madison. The guys from CloudOps also have a virtual booth. So if you want to know more and if you want to discuss the topic further, please visit their virtual booth. I'm pretty sure that Madison will be happy to chat with you there.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining the event, and let's keep in touch in the virtual lounge and in the networking parties.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Yvette. Thanks, everyone.